Welcome to the Startup Grind.
I'd like to thank Laura Corder for introducing us. Laura is as Director of Communications with our Office of Economic Engagement at the university, also handles communications for the incubator. I've got Jay Britt in the back, who's our Director of Operations. Raise your hand, Jay. And also Jack Beasley, who's a new addition to our team. And Anne-Marie is Nunziata is somewhere around here as well. Oh, here she is. Another part of our team who really makes this happen. Christian also is back there with the headphones on doing the videotaping. So I'm excited to do that because we spent the last year just trying to kind of round out our team, and these guys definitely make it happen. So I know that I can show up. And John, I've known John for a while, so it's fun to interview you, and I know you've got a good team as well. And so let's just roll right into it. You know, Startup Grind is focused on entrepreneurs. It's focused on people who had an idea, saw an opportunity, went out there and took it as a way of inspiring others to do the same. And so we start out with our first question. John, have you always been an entrepreneur, or was it something that you evolved into?
I think I've always been an entrepreneur. Started at a very young age, became very aware of the profit motive when my parents said that, you know, you can have anything you want, you just have to pay for it. So as a kid, you start thinking, okay, how am I going to pay for the things that I want? And so I was always very ambitious when it came to earning money. It's funny, a very similar story, I think, to most entrepreneurs. I mean, I believe that most people have an entrepreneurial spirit and they have that thought. The difference is that the entrepreneurs that later in life actually either have the nerve or the insanity or the feeling of no other choice but to actually go through with it and start something. But so I think everybody has it in them, but then I think, you know, a lot of people over time, society and pressures of families and things like that, you know, tell people that you need to get a real job or, you know, do one of those normal things. And so I was never one of those normal people. So I was, you know, quite a hustler at a young age, and have really pretty much always been an entrepreneur.
So what inspired your first startup?
Like the first real one, like the first company?
Well, so I think it would be cool for you to do like your first kind of lemonade stand type startup and then your first real startup and hit both and you know, maybe contrast if you want to.
So the first, you know, lemonade stand type story was I was a gum dealer. We're not supposed to have gum in the elementary schools and stuff like that. Yeah, and statute of limitations, I'm pretty old, so I think we're good on this one. And it was in another state, so we're all good. But I, you know, would buy gum wholesale. First I was just buying packs and selling pieces, and then I just kept moving up the supply chain and buying it, you know, by the case. And then I actually found out who the wholesaler was and cut out the retailers. I was buying bubble yum wholesale and selling it at school. Till I got caught. And then just sold it more discreetly at school.
This was back when gum was banned in 48 states. But so let's transition to your first real startup.
So my first real startup was really about a year out of Carolina. I was working for a large company that was into library services. And I was doing sales for them, and it was a very consultative selling process. And this brand new technology had come out. Now, some of you guys are so young, you won't even have heard of this technology. Others of you that are older will be like, man, I can't believe when that was new. But it was called CD-ROMs. And what happened with CD-ROMs was one of the first good applications for the technology was in the library space. You could take a full set of the Grolier Encyclopedia, put it on one disk. So instead of having these volumes of material, it was on a disk. The beauty of it was you could search it, and you could actually do Boolean searches and keyword searches, and it was a tremendous tool. So the internet didn't exist back then. So this was really a game changer for the libraries. And I've always been a technology guy. I'm sort of an accidental technology guy. I have some real technology people in this room, but I was like, you know, a pseudo technology guy, more of like a super user. But back then, a super user was like Merlin the magician, so you could actually make money just by understanding a little bit of it. So I got really excited about CD-ROM technology, and the company that I was working for didn't quite get it. They didn't see the potential of it. They were selling it, and the prices were unbelievably high. Like the external CD-ROM drive to go on your 286 computer was about $1,750 just for the CD drive. Computer was like $4,000, and really expensive stuff. So I saw the potential in the technology, really latched onto it. It was doing very well selling the technology. It was actually the top person selling it countrywide. Library associations would actually get me to come talk to conferences, and the company just didn't have the foresight and the wisdom, and they kept saying, but you can't go to California and sell this, that's not even your territory. I was like, yeah, but somebody from our company is going to get the sale if I go talk to this conference, and I can have 200 prospects in a room actually paying to listen to me talk about it. That's a pretty good deal for you guys as a company. And they kept saying, nope, nope, not your job, not your job. And I found that pretty amazing. And then on top of that, their support was horrendous because they thought, my job is just to sell it. So we would sell it, the boxes would show up at the library, but nobody knew how to implement it. First of all, they couldn't install the card in their computer and make the thing work at all. And then even if they did have somebody on staff who could do that, they didn't know how to use the technology well and to train people on it. And I kept telling them, that's the real opportunity, because if we just buy one and ship them a box, or if they just buy one and we ship them the boxes, but no, they don't utilize it correctly, they'll only ever buy one. If we can turn them on to how to use the technology to make things better, they'll buy hundreds of them. And they kept saying, no, 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 that's not your problem. You got to, you have to spend less time at your existing customers helping them. And I would say, do you hear how that sounds? Because that doesn't sound great. So I realized that I was selling a whole lot of this stuff for a company with really high prices and horrible support, and was doing really well at it. And I started thinking, are they buying it because of the company that I'm working for, or because I've convinced them that it was going to work for them? So I made the assumption that it was because I was doing a good job selling it to them. So I thought, well, what do I need from these guys? I'm going to start my own company. So had my commission check, had $600 in the bank, thought I was in pretty good shape. So I was like, time to launch. Had my business plan together. I was a finance major at Carolina, so I'd done some projections. I had my spreadsheets. I'm ready to rock and roll. And about 2 months into it, I got a cease and desist letter from this really large multinational corporation, and thought, that really wasn't on that plan that I had kind of drawn up. What do I do? So I went to a friend of mine who was an attorney and asked him about it, and he says, yeah, you could probably win this, and if you want to duke it out, I think you'd be okay, because your non-compete had nothing to do with this kind of stuff. They didn't even envision doing this, and so I thought, okay, I'll be in good shape. And then he said, so I'm going to need like a $5,000 retainer, and here we go. I thought, okay, that's only about $4,400 more than I currently have to my name. All right, so I basically had to change that business model and not sell CD-ROM technology to libraries, and had to pretty much completely shift things pretty much immediately to survive. But so that was my first real venture into being an entrepreneur.
So let's transition to when, and you may want to just quickly fill in the gaps from that experience to when you got into Advanced Automation Consulting and formed that. And my next question is, when was there a moment when you decided there was real potential? In this story, I think we've already run that one out. But I would say, give us a little bit of history between that experience and then where you were, and then obviously when you decided to start Advanced Automation, that was a different process with a different outcome, and then you can bridge into when you realized you had something with AAC.
Okay, so actually that one was AAC. So that was back many, many moons ago, and that was Advanced Automation Consulting, but we were in the DC area, and that's where the market was. And so a lot of things were going on during that time in technology. I mean, the pace of technology advancement has always been fast, but I mean, between then and now, some of the most game-changing things in the history of technology have happened. One of which being that back in the day, you could make a whole lot of money selling hardware. In those days, we sold hardware and software and provided services to help people implement, and did a little bit of custom application development. But the margins kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller on PCs. So I kind of saw that handwriting on the wall. Michael Dell pretty much ruined it for all of us that were making money as resellers selling other people's technology. So Michael Dell did really, really well, but hurt a lot of us. But so that business evolved, and I guess at one point I got approached by a friendly competitor, and I wasn't looking to exit, although interestingly I was very much looking to get back to South Carolina because I fell in love with the area when I came here for school. And so for years had been trying to get back to Columbia, but the business kept doing better and better, so how do you walk away from something you started? And so finally one day a friendly competitor came up to me and talked about merging, and I was able to convince them that rather than merging and me run the combined company, because they were like 4 or 5 years older than me, that they should buy me and I should move to the lake in South Carolina. And was able to convince them that that was a good idea. And so I was able to do that. So I came down here. So I sold the company. It was really out of IT, but that was still AAC back in that day, and came to Columbia to pursue the dream. And at that point, I had decided that I was going to launch a microbrewery because there was not a brewery in Columbia. So I figured microcomputers, microbrewery. To me, it was a very logical segue, which is one of those common traits of entrepreneurs is, we think a little bit differently. Sometimes it's really not logical, but I made the leap and tried that. So I did the brewery. Is there another question I should stop for here? Or do you want to hear about the brewery? Which is why I thought there'd be cocktails. I mean, you got a guy that had a brewery. It's not a bar. I thought there'd at least be a keg.
So what happened after the brewery?
So, some of the lessons that entrepreneurs learn the hard way is, like I said from the first example, you have to be agile and you have to be flexible and you have to think quick on your feet because, the best laid plans don't always work out. So that first iteration of AAC, right in the beginning, I had to change. And then I very much, had to evolve the company to where at the end, we weren't really selling any hardware. We would just tell people, look, you buy it from Dell, we'll come and install it, we'll train you, we'll do the services. So we were really completely a services company. And that's when we started doing custom applications and databases and stuff like that. So with the brewery, the very hard lesson was that, timing is everything. And, one of the things that is a really good skill for an entrepreneur, which I clearly wasn't demonstrating at the time, is you have to make analytical decisions based on, financial possibilities and realistic, logical marketing assumptions. And, I made a lot of bad choices with the brewery. South Carolina is a great physical location. As far as distribution to the southeast, Columbia is tremendous. We've got a great highway system and in beer distribution, that's, pretty much your method. But at the time, we had some of the worst liquor laws in the country. But I chose Columbia because I wanted to get back to Columbia. So I made I made a business decision based on emotional criteria, which was, turns out to not be really smart. So I was pretty much about a decade too early for Columbia, South Carolina. It would have been a decade too late for Seattle or Oregon, but for Columbia, South Carolina, I was about a decade too early. So I had to make the painful choice of, you start this thing from scratch. I had some cash from selling AAC the first time. So, at that age, thought I was well off. Didn't know what that actually meant. At the time, but so took a chunk of money to start the brewery and took a chunk of money and put it someplace else. And I guess sort of like a gambler going to Vegas. If you want to be smart about it, have your limits. And say here's what I'm willing to invest. Here's what I'm willing to lose. Because as an entrepreneur, you can lose it all. I mean, things can go to zero. Even just as a purchaser of stock, stocks that are trading on the Dow, they can go to zero. People are always like, oh, what's the worst that can happen? You can lose all your money. So it happens. So I got to the point where I had about $500,000 worth of stainless steel ordered, and they were about to start fabricating it. And once you hit that point and they start welding, it's yours. And that's really your point of no return. So I looked at it and I said, okay, I've got X in this already. I'm about to have another $500,000 in it, and is this going well enough to support that? And do I see it? Is the trajectory good enough that I'm going to get a return on this investment? Because at the end of the day, it's a business. I mean, it was a lot of fun. I had a huge passion for it. I love beer. We had great beer. We had a lot of good things going for it. But when I did the analysis, when I was objective about it, I said, this isn't going to make the money that it needs to make to justify an investment that size. And so no pun intended, I liquidated the assets of the brewery. And people still try to get me to get back in the brewing business these days, and I tell them I've got great recipes, I've got a lot of great stuff, but we're going to use your money and let's go.
So what happened after that?
So I liquidated the brewery. Yeah, wind him up, let him go. So I liquidated the brewery. Was basically living off of stock trading. I've almost been a stockbroker a couple of different times, but don't like the model because I hope I'm not going to offend any brokers in the room. But my problem with the stock brokerage model is that you and your broker, your interests are not aligned. It's I don't want to offend the attorneys in the room either, Chad, but it's sort of like that you buy a stock and you lose money, they made a commission. You go, oh my gosh, I lost money, I got to sell. They make a commission. What do you put it in now? Well, now let's buy this. They make a commission. So like you can keep losing money and they keep making money. So it's so I decided it's much better to be on the other side where you're charging by the hour, which is what we do now. But so I was toyed with the stock thing for a while. So I always traded my own money. I looked at opening a brokerage firm, but couldn't find anybody that wanted to do it the way I wanted to do it, which was basically, if you're my client, we're partners, and if I make you money, I make 10% of what I make you. If I don't make you any money, you don't pay me anything. And they were all like, you can't do that. I was like, but that's the way it should work, but it's not the way it works. So didn't do that. So I basically went back into what I know, which is IT. I had a guy from Rotary who knew me as the beer guy, and he kept asking me all these questions. Like, didn't you used to be in IT? Yeah, so he kind of pulled me back into the IT world, sort of like the old Al Pacino thing. You think you're out, and then they just pull you back in. And so it was a good move because I knew that market. I knew and understood IT. I clearly didn't know and understand the brewing business. So I went back to what I knew.
Now, my best understanding of Advanced Automation Consulting today is that you help companies and industries meet their IT needs by you provide the resource of being able to outsource IT talent to those companies, and that's a very lucrative model because IT talent's hard to get, and also IT talent tends to be transitional. You hire them in. When I used to work at Eastman, we would hire guys to come in and set up SAP, and when it was done, they were gone. So there's a need for fungibility, I guess, in that market of that asset. When you say you got pulled back into IT, did you start with the model you have now, or was it something different when you first entered back into the IT realm?
Yeah, so when I got back into it, I was working for this guy had just sold his local company to a large national company that had just gone public. And they were basically doing exactly what AAC did when I sold it. He was just smarter and sold for more money. So they hired me to basically do what I'd always done with AAC for this large national company. And it is exactly what AAC does today. It's, IT consulting and staffing services, bringing in exactly like you said, specific expertise for specific projects for a specified amount of time. Now, fortunately, we hire great people and they tend to make themselves indispensable to their clients, so we end up staying around for a long time. And I've had the good fortune of finding some really great folks who have stayed with us for a long time and have been at a bunch of different clients and helped out a lot of different people. So it was the same model, just for a different company. And then it's interesting how history repeats itself. So I went to work for that company. That company was fantastic. I mean, they had a great culture. They really took care of the people. To me, it's pretty simple. You better find really good people, and you better take really good care of them, because without them, you've got nothing. And same thing is, you better understand what your clients need and really be focused on your clients. Chad and I are involved together at the incubator. I'm on their board, and we advise companies and stuff. And you look at people's business plans and you talk to them, and especially in IT, some people come up with some brilliant technology, but the question is, who's going to buy it? Who's your customer? What problem is this solving, or what need is this filling? Because cool technology for the sake of cool technology doesn't make any money. And again, at the end of the day, you have to turn a profit.
And you have to service what you sell. Correct.
Absolutely. You better take care of that customer from end to end, or somebody else will. And I think that's true of any business. I don't care what your business model is. If you're not looking out for your client until the very end of the cycle, you're missing out, and somebody will step in and do it. So I was with that company. They sold to an even larger international company who had a completely different culture and a completely different take. Their model was pretty much convince all of your good relationships that you've made, convince them to outsource everything to us so that we can ship it to India, which I just don't think is in anybody's best interest. I don't think it's been effective. I think over time it's been proven that you save a little bit of money up front, but it's the total cost of ownership that counts, and getting a system that actually works on time, within budget, and that's very difficult to do when you outsource it. So I had a very interesting relationship with that company. Being an entrepreneur, I'm fairly outspoken. I don't really work well in large corporate America. They ask a question, and like an idiot, I think they actually want my opinion, so I give it to them, and it turns out that really doesn't line up with what they want to do, and they don't want to hear about it. Which is fine. I can salute smartly and march when you have to, and I did that for a while, but then when there are certain things that violate my core principles, I just won't do that, not for a check or anything else. And so they eventually fired me because they wanted me to do something that I thought was unethical, and I refused to do it, and so they fired me. And so I guess, advice to startups and entrepreneurs is I was miserable in that company for a year and a half because we just didn't mesh. And I had been talking about starting my own company again for at least a year of that year and a half because I just, that's who I am, it's what I do. But my personal circumstances were pretty difficult at the time, and I just thought, I can't take this financial risk now because of where I was. So I stuck it out until I had no choice. Even though I knew the right thing to do was to go back out on my own. I just sucked it up and stayed until I didn't have a choice, which was fantastic. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. So I went to a bunch of my consultants that were working for me and the people and my clients, and I said, hey, they fired me today. I got a couple of options. I could go to work for a friendly competitor and try and continue to work with you guys, or I could restart AAC and deal with you guys that way. And every single client and every single consultant except for one, which is funny because one of my guys works with him now, we're still close, they all said, start AAC again because, we want to know that we're dealing with you and that you're actually making the decisions instead of, somebody way up this corporate chain. So I did it, and so I launched AAC again. That was 2003, and that was the best thing that could have happened to me, getting fired. The lesson learned, though, the interesting thing was how history repeats itself. So this time it took them about 2 weeks to send me the cease and desist letter and saying they were going to sue me for violating a non-compete, which actually wasn't valid. There's very specific things you have to do to have a valid non-compete. So I said, you know what? A, I've got no choice, and B, this is worth fighting for. So this time, instead of being the guy with $600 in the bank, I still don't have a lot of money in the bank because of the personal situation, and then they took a bunch out. So I could give you guys all kinds of nightmare stories about things that actually can happen. But you'd go, no, people can't do that.
But I promise not to ask you any of those questions.
Okay, thank you.
Right.
Whatever you want, Chad. It's an open book. But this time I said, you know what? I lawyered up, and I said, this is worth fighting for. So I went and got the best lawyers that you can get in town. And I said, if they want to fight, we're going to have a fight because this is worth it. And so I spent the first year and a half or 2 years of this iteration of AAC battling the international behemoth in court. And that was quite fun. It was an interesting life lesson. Which, some of those lessons I would say is, as an entrepreneur, pick your advisors carefully, go get outside advice from other entrepreneurs, but get a good team behind you. Get good lawyers. If, when nobody likes paying legal fees, but when you need them, you need them. And when you need them, don't shop on price, get the best one you can get because it's all about how it ends up. It's not about, the process. And so that's how it went. So I lawyered up and eventually won.
Now, during that time when you were in the process of fighting the cease and desist, were you not able to do anything, or? Oh
no, I did everything.
I mean, as far as were you not able to operate?
No, we operated.
You kept going.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I had no choice. I mean,
that's good.
That's how I was going to pay the lawyers.
That's good. And so I would echo what John's saying. A lot of entrepreneurs form out of coming out of a company that was dysfunctional. And so we do a lot. I do a lot at the incubator and with amongst friends and as a lawyer looking at non-competes and understanding what those mean. And, and I always tell people, for the non-lawyers and employees out there, you better know what you're signing. You better, most of us, when we get the employment contract, we look at the number, which is the salary. And it is kind of like Willy Wonka, isn't it? Where like the numbers there in real big type, but then all the little stuff like the non-competes in real small type, and that's on the back. And they're like, just sign this, sign this, sign this. And so yeah, those have real implications. And I've actually helped a lot of people navigate that as well. And it's always a lot of fun. And it's that weird spot. It's that weird place of, you can beat it, but you've still got to go through the process because there's just legal stuff involved, and so you survived that. So good for you.
I did. It's funny. It's like all of the other legal documents. It's everybody thinks they know what they mean, and they, Chad and I are talking. We can agree on what it is we're trying to do. But as my attorneys have told me over the years, it's having a document that two people who weren't in the room can both read it and they agree on what it means. And that's what's important. And the other thing is that, agreements are good, but they're only as good as you are willing to enforce them. So you can have the best contracts in the world, and there's some great business case models that we've studied at Carolina, and the one that comes to mind is the guy that he invented the intermittent wiper. And he had a great patent on the intermittent wiper. And he went to Ford and GM and he tried to sell them on it, and they all told him no, and then they all stole his idea. And he had a rock solid patent. But that patent is only as good as his ability to go after them and enforce it. And this guy sold everything he had, mortgaged his house, ended up, his wife divorced him, and he was one of those unreasonable guys, which again is one of those entrepreneur characteristics, is you have to have the courage of your convictions to just do what you know is right, regardless of the consequences. And so the guy fought forever, almost lost everything, and he beat Ford in court. And he got like a $10 million settlement or something for them infringing on his patent, which of course he turned around to his attorneys and said, well, here's the war chest to go after the other three. And of course they all just wrote checks. I mean, they're like, uh-oh, he's already got the precedent. So in the end, the guy won and he got paid for his invention. But had he not been willing to go to the mat and fight for his idea and protect his patent, they all would have just stolen his idea and gone on their merry way. And that's unfortunately the way it works a lot of times, is the big guy tries to crush the little guy because they know all we have to do is out-lawyer him and outlast him in court. And that's not the American dream, and that's not what this is all supposed to be built on, but that's the reality. So you've got to be realistic. You have to pick your partners carefully, get good advice. It's a shame that that stuff takes place, but it does.
So we'll fast forward to where you are today. Advanced Automation Consulting has been around for
this time a little over 10 years, 11 years.
A little over 10 years.
12 years.
11 years, 12 years.
Entrepreneurs are often not really good detail people.
That's right.
And the big joke in my office is I'm really bad when it comes to time. Like I'm thinking, that was like 6 months ago. And people are like, no, that was 4 years. Are you sure? And then it turns out they're usually right.
So what would you say, as it stands today, what's the biggest challenge that faces your company today?
For us, as a company, it's really all about talent acquisition. It's a very competitive field. IT talent, good IT talent is hard to find. In our case, it's even more difficult because we not only have to find people who are very talented technically, but they have to have the people skills to be a good consultant. Great IT people sometimes are just really brilliant, but you've probably all met one where they could not possibly explain to you in terms that you could even come close to understanding how or why something works. And you're asking them something very simple, and you don't really want to know all the details. You just want to know one little bit of it, but they just go on this huge deep dive, and your eyes glaze over, and you're like, oh, God, I'm sorry I ever asked. And there's actually some IT people who do that intentionally because they don't want to get asked. Well, those aren't the people that we are looking for. We're looking for the ones who can explain it to 4 different people at 4 different levels, and all 4 of them get it, and they can explain it to them in English. And so the hardest part for us is finding the really good, really talented people, and the people that are in it for the right reasons, the people who are in it because they have passion for it and who really want to help our clients do it right. We've got one of the examples is in the room here. Lyde Winburn is one of my consultants, and we talk to clients all the time about, is this the right one? And with Lied, it's really all about what's the client's project like, because if it's not technology that interests him, it doesn't matter how well compensated he is, he doesn't want to do it. I mean, he wants to do it because he's passionate about the technology. And if he's not helping them improve the way they do things and take advantage of what technology can do today, then he doesn't want to do it. He doesn't want to sit there and just bang out code, for the whole bunch of money that he makes. He wants to help people move the needle, and that's the hard thing to find, and that's what we look for. So that's always our biggest challenge is finding those people and then keeping those people. And a lot of times our clients recognize the skill of those people, and then they want to convert them and make them their employees instead of my employees. And so
and that's when your non-compete kicks in, right?
Yeah, but ours is actually very reasonable.
Okay.
So we actually allow that and encourage that at times, and when we get compensated for it, but it's it's part of the business.
Yeah. So rule of thumb is that you may be under a non-compete and hate it, but also it behooves you to learn how to use that for your advantage as well, because they're there for a reason. So what would you say is your favorite part of being a business owner?
I guess my favorite part is helping people. It's, when you find a new client, I still get all jacked up, like for existing clients and new clients, but when you can help them, it's a great feeling. And then on the flip side, we describe our business as a love triangle because we have to help the client. And then, you can find an IT person, like Lied, who might be in a situation where he's good at his job, but he's at a place that he doesn't really like. And you can go and take them out of a place they don't like, put them in a place they do like, compensate them really well. So now you've got a client that really appreciates what you do. You've got a consultant who appreciates what you do. And at the end of the day, the company gets to make a reasonable profit at the same time. So it's like this, win-win-win. And that feels great. And when you can do that for people, that feels great.
Now, this is the question you told me to add, so I asked you what the favorite part of being a business owner is. What's the worst part? But you said, hey, let's do the negative. What's the worst part of being an entrepreneur?
Well, to dovetail with what we just talked about, is the worst part is when that part goes south, because, again, we've talked about the reality is you want to think the best of everybody. You always want to hope for the best, but plan for the worst. So I guess the worst part is when people take advantage of you and, do stuff that you really wish people wouldn't do. That part is really, really difficult. The other part as an entrepreneur that's difficult is, it takes a lot. It takes a huge, huge commitment. And if you're not willing to be all in, then you really shouldn't do it. And an entrepreneur's definition of all in is really radically different than most people's definition of all in. Don Tomlin's got a great expression. He says, you just better look at it as a part-time job, a half-time job. And to him, half-time means 12 hours a day. And as an entrepreneur, 12 hours is a pretty typical day. I mean, it might even be a short day, for a while. And you better be willing to do that. And then you have to be willing to put all of your personal stuff on the line, and that can bite you. And again, that's why you get good advisors. You incorporate, you do an LLC so that you hopefully aren't putting everything at risk all the time. But the reality is you're putting a lot at risk all the time, and there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. There was times when we were growing rapidly enough that cash flow becomes a problem, and there was times when if you can't make payroll, what do you do? And in my case, back in those times, it was the guy that didn't get paid was me, and that's pretty tough to explain to some of your stakeholders that I'm not getting paid, don't know when I'm going to get paid, depends on when the clients pay us, and things of that nature, and that can be really difficult. And then the other part that's scary that people have to get used to. And it all depends on your business model and what your business is as an entrepreneur. But it's one thing when you're counting on yourself to do everything and to make things happen and to make this successful so that you can get paid and eat and pay for your mortgage. When it hits you is your company grows and you realize, oh my God, I've got 20 other people, 30 other people, 40 other families counting on me making good decisions so that this company survives so I can pay them. And that's when you're like, oh crap, if this goes south, it's not just bad for me, it can be bad for a lot of people. And that's a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility. And it wears on you at times. So I guess it's the whole thing of the highs are really high and the lows are really low. So, you got to be able to deal with it. It's like being a professional golfer. When you're playing great, it's the best job on the planet. When you're not, it's a job.
Yeah, and we only see the winners, right? You only see the people who are up top. You don't see the 5,000 other people.
They don't show the parking lot on Friday afternoon with the guys missing the cut, throwing all their junk in the trunk to head out of town.
Yeah, and I think too, you've proven the point, as a lot of entrepreneurs that we deal with. It almost never. I would say it probably never. I can't say never as a lawyer because they told me never to say that. But I would say it almost never is the case that somebody's right on their first shot and they get it all right. I've heard multiple entrepreneurs like yourself where they learned, they were either in a business and they understood the model, so that was part of their learning that helped them kind of catapult into a viable startup, or they had several startups that just failed miserably, and every one of those things was kind of a learning process along the way. And
in my case, the first one did work, but I had to change the model. And the model had to keep changing. As technology changed and margins changed, we had to change what we were doing because, you couldn't survive.
Yeah, that's a great point, because we have people come in sometimes that have had a model that have worked, and then their sales start dropping or their profits are dropping, and they tend to just do the same thing they were doing but harder. And that's kind of when you go really quickly down into the decline.
But now you're going broke faster.
Yeah, you're just going broke faster. So yeah, I think your point about you've got to be willing to pivot and transition and keep your eyes open to the marketplace is very important. So you're a board member at the incubator. You're there, and you get to see people coming in. You've been there, done that. You've got experience. How do you? Let's take any opportunity that comes through the door. How today? What are if I said, John, give me 5 things today that you look for when you see an opportunity, and put yourself in the entrepreneur's shoes. Hey, am I going to move forward or not? And you've kind of hit on some of those, but what would be like those 5 things today that you say, I got to have those?
The first one is, tell me what your revenue model is. Tell me who your customer is and what the problem is that you're solving. What is the need? And, and it doesn't have to be brand new. It doesn't have to be unique. You just have to be, it's like the old joke about the guys that are running from the grizzly bear when they're hiking. And, the one guy starts putting on his track shoes and the other guy's like, you idiot, you can't outrun that bear. And he says, I don't have to outrun the bear. Just have to outrun you. And it's the same thing in business. You don't have to be the guy that invented this technology. You don't have to have all the answers to this brand new thing. In fact, a lot of times the people who create a market aren't the ones that ultimately make money from that market. It's usually the second or third guy that comes along, lets them establish the market, do all the bleeding, and then they come in behind it and figure out how to do it better. And so that's really my thing is, who's your customer? Is there a market for it? Who are your competitors, if there's already competitors, and what's going to differentiate you from them? And then how quickly will you be able to break even and make money? I'm an old school guy. I still look at some of these, .com companies and scratch my head because, they've been in business for 10 years. Their stock valuations are through the roof. Their market cap is in the billions, and they've never made a dime. I mean, they've actually lost money still. I'm like, man, when I was in business school, they really kind of discouraged that. But so I'm still old school with that. I look at, how long is it before you can actually turn a profit? I mean, because revenue is great. You got to have revenue. To have any profits, you got to have revenue. But if you're not making any money and your margins are so thin that you have to, get this huge market share or sell an amazing amount just to even break even, it might not be a very realistic business model. So those are some of the things I look for. And I look for experience and, does this person know this market that they're getting into, or is this something completely new to them? Again, if I looked at that, it's like, does this guy know anything about brewing beer? So, that's the thing. We set up these guidelines, then we violate them all the time. And then, are they the type of people who will build a team and that will surround themselves with good people? Because, and do they recognize what they're good at and what they're not good at? Because entrepreneurs are often very good at the vision and the idea stage and the launch stage, but they're not good at running a company. It's just like in our world, a lot of programmers are great programmers, and a lot of people want to force them into managing other programmers. Well, those are two completely different skill sets. And just because you're good at one doesn't mean you're going to be good at the other. And in fact, oftentimes it precludes you from being good at the other. And so entrepreneurs need to recognize that. And sometimes you see people who they think they have all the answers, or they think they can play all the roles. And you have to do some of that in the beginning because you're bootstrapping it. You don't have a lot of cash to hire other people, but you really better recognize what your strengths are and what your weaknesses are, and play to your strengths and hire good people to take care of your weaknesses. Because trust me, they're there, and if they don't show up in the launch stage, they're eventually going to show up. And a lot of companies get to a certain level and then fail because the entrepreneur who was great at the original concept really isn't good at running the company.
Yeah, and so we've talked all about your business, all about your history, all about how you've come up and how AAC's gotten started. And so on the other side, though, what are things that you do, or what are things that you've discovered as you've gone through the rigor of being an entrepreneur and the schedule you keep? What are some things you do that you can't go without, or what's one thing or item or activity you can't go without today that you need to do to maintain your sanity?
Well, I guess first we have to, look at the elephant in the room and tackle the assumption that I'm sane. So it's a relative term.
Your relative version of sanity.
The entrepreneur version of sane. I probably qualify for that. You have to have some outside interests, and you have to have balance. The part that keeps me sane is probably faith, because the older you get and the more you do things like I do, you realize you're not in control of a lot of these variables. Again, you plan, you do business modeling, you do all these things, and you map out all these variables. But in reality, and it's really smart to think about them. You should give a lot of thought to it. You should try and mitigate the risks. You need to do all those things. But the reality is you're just not in control of that many of the variables. So it's kind of like driving a race car. You have to get comfortable at the edge and being slightly out of control. And you have to recognize that you don't really have control. You want to manage it. You want to get as close to that edge as you can, because that's the only way to go fast and succeed. But you're really not in control. So, having faith and then having outside interests, because if you can't try to focus on other things, it can make you crazy. And that's where it's recognizing the good times and the bad times. And the good times, it's pretty easy, because life's great, everything's rolling along. So if you think about something that's going great 24/7, that's really not that hard to do. Now, when things are going bad and there's challenges, and then if you think about it 24/7, it will make you crazy. So, or crazier. So it's, having something to distract you and switch off, and truly be able to switch it off. I think one of the things that I do well, which drives some people crazy, is I can very much compartmentalize, because I have to. If you're juggling enough things, if you can't shut that off for 15 minutes to focus on that, then you'll end up doing a whole bunch of things, but none of them well.
What are other interests that you have outside your company, in addition to your faith, just activities or other business ventures or things that you are in that help round you out and are just in line with your passions and things that you like to do?
I have, whenever I would give talks on entrepreneurship in the business school and stuff, I tell them, first, don't suck. Just, be better than the other guys, no matter what it is you're doing. But it's also, you have to have a passion for what you're doing. So unfortunately for me, and a great way to start a business is to combine your passions. If you can make your passion your business, then it doesn't seem like that much work. So if you enjoy that and can make a business out of it and make some money, it's not a bad thing to do. So unfortunately, on several occasions, I've taken those passions and made them businesses. So I like all things that go fast. And so I like flying. Golf isn't fast, but I like golf. So I combined those passions and created a private aviation business for professional golfers to combine my two passions. The lesson there was, as soon as I did it, I played less golf and had no time to fly. So because now I had another full-time job to go with the 1.5 full-time jobs I already had. So I do those things. I enjoy water sports, cars, kids, all that stuff.
And I will say I enjoy that you like fast things, because I've been with you in the GTR, so that's been fun, and we didn't get arrested, thank God, and we're both still alive, so that's the most important part. So, you're in Columbia, and you came back to Columbia because of the university, and you're still here, and it doesn't sound like you plan to go anywhere. What's your biggest reason, for you've already kind of talked about why you want to locate, but I mean, do you see yourself staying here and running the business, and then where do you see AAC evolving into, and what are your biggest challenges as far as the future of AAC? What your plans are?
I guess I'll take those in reverse order. The future for AAC and the plans are to just keep expanding, but doing it in a controllable, sustainable way. We don't want to go into a new market and fall on our face or overcommit to something that we can't deliver, because you really only get one chance at new clients. So we always want to pick up new clients. We want to expand geographically eventually, but the key to that is the people. I can't be everywhere, and so you have to have the right people in those cities. I mean, the model that I believe in is that local resources are better for local projects. The flying people in, flying them out, commuting, with our long-term vision of the way the business should work, that just doesn't work out. So it's much more difficult to expand into other markets and do it right and do it the way I think it should be done. So we want to do some of that, but we want to do it the right way. And then, the Columbia piece, no matter how much we expand into other markets, Columbia to me is probably where I'll always want to live. One of the major reasons that we wanted to move back down here when we did was up in DC. I mean, I love DC. There's so much stuff going on. There's so much opportunity. I mean, the market there is just huge compared to Columbia. But again, at the time, I was out of IT and into beer. But even for IT and for everything else, I look at it in the pace of life up there and the environment isn't where I wanted to raise my kids, and we were expecting our first child at the time. So moving to Columbia was kind of a dream come true, because it's just I think an amazing quality of life that you have in Columbia. The cost of living is reasonable. The climate is great, even with this heat. I mean, the heat is good, because I tell people all the time, because we relocate people from all over the country. So yeah, it's hot, but you don't have to shovel heat to get out of your driveway in the middle of winter. So if you got to have you got to pick your poison, I'll take the heat. So I think Columbia's got a great Columbia's got a great economy, because there's some anchors here that are very, very stable. You've got the state government, you've got the University of South Carolina, you've got Fort Jackson. So it's a very stable nucleus that's here that helps, I think, a lot of the companies be very stable. And again, Columbia is sort of actually a lot like our business performance is. When the housing bubble burst, there wasn't that big a bubble in Columbia, because Columbia didn't rocket up like some of the other markets did, and therefore we didn't rocket back down. And AAC's been kind of the same way. We haven't had the meteoric growth, but then again we didn't have we haven't had the floor drop out and go to nothing either. So I guess I'd rather be in a place. It's actually sounding odd coming from me, to be conservative and steady and predictable versus the wild, crazy ride. So I guess I scratch that itch in other ways. But Columbia is just a great place, and I haven't found any other place. When we were considering Columbia, we looked at Lake Lanier in Atlanta, Lake Wylie, Lake Norman in Charlotte. Water was the consistent theme. I had to live on the water, and because I always wanted to my whole life and never had. So I was like, I've done this long enough. I want to be on the water. And Columbia was just, hands down the best combination of all those things. And, you've got good schools, you've got a lot of opportunity, great climate, and friendly people. I mean, the stereotypes really are kind of friendly. Like when I go to New York and walk around, it's like you're making eye contact with people, and they're like hands over their wallets. They think you're some crazy dude, and you come down here and everybody's waving, like on the lake, on the boats, all boaters wave to each other. Well, the South is that way. I mean, people just wave to each other. People are just nice, and and to me, that's a better way to do business and hang out.
I think that's a good endorsement for where we live. So, and I appreciate that as well. When I go foreign places, it's not the same. So, this has been a great interview. I mean, you've laid out a bunch of stuff. Are there any final remarks you have for the group?
I mean, I would just say, if you think you have the entrepreneur virus in you, then, run with it. Be careful, but be passionate. And as long as you've got something that you really think can go for it. And don't let people talk you out of it, because a lot of people will talk you out of it. I go back to, I think everybody's got that in them, but very few people take the leap. And then the ones who continuously leap, are the real entrepreneurs, because it's one of those things where once you really start, it's kind of hard to stop. I'm 100% certain at this point I'm completely unemployable in corporate America anyway. So you've got no choice but to keep going forward and to continue being an entrepreneur.
And I will say, I really appreciate John as a friend and as a colleague and as somebody that's fighting the good fight in Columbia and such an important part of our fabric. And the thing that I think is the best part about John is he gives back. He's involved with us at the incubator. He spends a lot of time doing things like this. He takes time with our companies. He participates in sitting down with young entrepreneurs and giving them advice and giving back. And I think, to me, that's also the real sign of somebody who's an entrepreneur, is that they, and you see it everywhere. And I think that's the cool part about entrepreneurs the world over, is that when somebody's been fortunate enough to have success and survived and able to sit up here and tell a good story, all of them always just want to give back. And so I just really appreciate that about you, and everybody in the audience has benefited from that tonight. So everybody give John a round of applause.
Thank you, sir.
All right, well, that wraps up the program. Do we do questions normally?
We have a few minutes for Q&A.
All right.
In the suit against you, did you recover the legal expenses, in winning that, or did you face the?
Well, that's the interesting part of it. So if you ask my attorneys, we won. But we were not able to recover their fees because they eventually wanted to just walk away from it, and we walked away. And the attorneys had to work extremely hard to convince me to do that. I joke with the folks at Nelson Mullins all the time that I am the best/worst client you can ever have, because to me, again, it's right and wrong. And if we're right, then I don't want to settle. And I was convinced that if we go to trial in Lexington County, South Carolina, versus this behemoth out of Boston, who very clearly didn't follow the law, there's no way we lose. And so had we gone to trial and won, we would have recovered the legal fees too. They were able to convince me that I should spend more time focusing on the business and less time battling it out with these folks. What was really funny was they eventually said, look, we'll write off the rest of your balance if you just let this go, because the partners don't want this to go to trial, and because they know it's going to be 2 more years. And I was like, So I finally did the math, and I said, I still win, because and that's what they were saying. They go, you have all of their business. They're pretty much non-existent in Columbia, South Carolina at this point. You're doing really well. Why don't you just smile and walk away? So that's what I did. So I was able to keep the business but not recover the legal fees, unfortunately.
So what kind of ballpark figure did it end up costing you? 50K, 100K?
Oh, no. That's the one thing about when you lawyer up and you go for the good lawyers. I think my out-of-pocket was just south of $200,000. Yeah, these guys were big dogs. I mean, they're a multinational, publicly traded company, and to fight them wasn't good. But again, I really recommend get good partners, get a legal team that you like and can trust and that will look out for you. Because obviously I didn't pay all that up front. I didn't have that. So I kept paying and paying when I paid what I could when I could, and I was honest with them and paid them when I could pay them, and they were very gracious about it. Because they trusted me that I would make it right. And one of the things I didn't talk about, I think you were going to ask about SCRA, and as part of being an SC launch company, they introduced me to, back then it was Wachovia, now it's Wells Fargo, and they've been a great banking partner. And I highly recommend any entrepreneur, if your business is cash intensive or capital intensive in any way, shape, or form, start trying to build those banking relationships early, because if you don't ever go talk to them until you need something, you're not going to have a lot of success. So you need to build those relationships, let them know your business and understand your business and understand you and get to know you, so that, because even at the end of the day, if you're not personally guaranteeing it, they're still looking at you and they're judging whether or not you are a good risk. They're looking at your company and your financials, but they're really looking at the person behind those financials when they're deciding if they're going to work with you or not. And I've had just tremendous luck with Wells Fargo, and really recommend them and the good firms that, and the way I got to meet them was because they participated in the SC Launch Program and the Incubator Program, where they're giving back. I mean, the whole reason I got with Nelson Mullins was because they had agreed to help incubator companies. And so that's how I made my contact with them. So it's pretty important to make those connections. If anybody has any less painful questions, that'd be great. I think about, man, I could do a lot with that money.
That's right.
What's the next big thing that you see?
In what category? I mean, in IT business, or?
Yeah, in your business, and things that you would pursue and things that you would be aggressive about.
Really just expanding the service offerings that we can offer our clients by trying to pick out niches that we see as something that a lot of people are going to need going forward, and there are some of those. Alvon is a project manager. 15, 20 years ago, most companies didn't know what a project management office was, and they didn't know what a PMP certification was. Today, most companies of any size are very familiar with it and buy into those concepts and are willing to pay for those skills, thankfully for you guys and me and us. So I think there are new disciplines within the IT world that will continue to gain traction and will become more and more viable service offerings, because the technology just keeps changing. I mean, years ago, if you'd have said everybody's going to have their stuff stored in the cloud on somebody else's hard drive someplace else in the world that you couldn't even, they couldn't put their finger on half the time, 15 years ago, people would have told you were crazy. When the internet first came out, we had a very large international client, and I had a guy that I had hired who just got out of the Navy, and he was a crypto expert. And he was telling me about the internet, and so we used it sparingly for them to send basically shorter than text messages on 300 baud modems. It took forever. So to send an actual file, literally would take overnight for a very small file. And he was telling me that the internet was going to be the next big thing. And my exposure to the internet was these little choppy short messages that took forever, and I was telling him he was crazy. And he started one of the first ISPs that I ever was familiar with, and he did pretty well. He ended up selling it for about $1 million, but he sold too early. If he'd held on, a couple more years, he would have sold it for $10 million. But he had the vision, and that's where, again, you don't have all the answers. Nobody has all the answers. And so he was trying to convince me to be in that business with him, and I was like, man, I just don't see it. If you'd have told him, and even the visionary that he was, if you'd have told him you can stream full-length movies in high def, in 1080 on your smartphone across the internet, he'd have been like, now that's just crazy talk. I mean, I'm big on this whole internet thing, but that's never going to happen. And, it's amazing. So I can't tell you what it is, but that's one of the things I like about IT is that it's always changing, it's always evolving, it's always getting cooler, faster, and better, and cheaper. And so that's pretty cool. I wish cars and airplanes and golf did that, but they don't.
So we actually have a question from Twitter. Speaking of things that are always changing.
And they make no money.
So the question is actually from
Their stock is through the roof.
Angels. They would like to know what is needed to get more investors engaged in the Midlands. We've got 40 members, but need more.
It's interesting because I've talked to those guys. I think it's a combination of two things. One, it's deal flow. You have to have investable deals to have more investors who want to invest in the deals. And I haven't been involved in this round of those guys, but I've been involved in prior iterations of them and looked at some of the deals. And again, going back to my old school self, I want to look at these deals and I want to see, when are you going to make money? And a lot of the concepts today, I think a lot of entrepreneurs in the dot-com era their idea of a startup is, I've got this really far out there idea. It's really a concept at best. I want to get a whole bunch of other people's money and see if I can make this work. And to me, that's, the complete opposite of everything I've ever done. I've always bootstrapped everything because, investors are great, but you're married. I mean, you owe them. If they're buying equity in your company, they have some say in how you want to run your company. And you better, in my estimation, you better be really careful in who you bring on board, and you should take investors not just for the cash because you don't want to risk your money and you want to risk theirs. To me, that's the wrong reason to take on investors. The investors you want to take on are activist investors who bring something to the table. So you want to have their cash, but you also want to have their connections and their know-how and their wisdom, because if they got enough money to be involved in an angel fund, they've probably done pretty well. And most of them are people, it's like Chad talked about, people giving back. They're like the Don Tomlins of the world who, they didn't inherit that money, they made that money. So they've got some pretty good ideas of things that work and things that don't work. They've got the battle scars, they've got, the wisdom. So if you can take outside money and get wisdom and, capital at the same time, then that's a great way to go. So I think, but there needs to be more investable companies that are looking for that as opposed to looking for somebody else to fund their trip to Vegas. If I want to go to Vegas and gamble, I want to go to Vegas and gamble. I don't want to give you a bunch of money to go to Vegas and gamble and tell me if it was fun or not when you got back. I think that's one of the things that kind of bothers me about some of the startups is they're looking for somebody else to take all the risk for them, and I'm not comfortable with that. If we're jumping out of an airplane, I want to jump together. I don't want you to pack my chute and I jump while you go. So I think if there was a better deal flow, then it would be easier to get accredited investors who are interested in doing it. And so I really think it boils down to deal flow, I think, is the biggest thing. Because I think there's plenty of people in this town who would jump all over it for the right deals. But it's got to be the right deals.
So with that, I think we're going to call tonight a close. But if you have other questions, please find myself or anybody, Chad, John. We can follow up later on. So with that, I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. There's a whole series of these on YouTube of past ones as well. So there's 8 others. So please go watch some of the other intriguing stories of all different backgrounds.
The other thing I'd like to point out in closing, because Laura does a great job at the incubator and Chad and the whole team, is if you think you are an entrepreneur and you've got that bug, one of the great things about Columbia is that the USC Columbia Technology Incubator is there, and it's a great place to go to find out, A, are you an entrepreneur? B, is your idea sound? I mean, it might still be sound even if they say it's not, but they are really, really good folks to go see and bounce this off of them because they can provide you a whole lot of resources, a whole lot of guidance. And, part of being an entrepreneur is you're on the high wire and you're pretty much working without a net. They can't give you a complete net, but they can slow down your fall or tell you, you might not want to step out onto that high wire, at least not this time or not with this idea and not at this time. But the resources that are available to you today as a budding entrepreneur in Columbia are better than they've ever been. And the angel network that Laura was talking about is kind of like the last piece of that puzzle. But for the pure startup mode, the incubator is great. You get a little bit of traction. You can go to SCRA and talk about being an SC launch company. You grow out of that. You can look at angel investors and doing public raises and stuff like that. And so I think the environment and the ecosystem in Columbia is better today than it's ever been. But the place to start, if you're starting out, is go to the incubator and talk to these guys.